A good afternoon to your distinguished guests from IAIS and also participants, and to our panel as well as our moderator. I do not have any slides for you today, and except for one confession I have to start to kind of clear the air. So I was asked a couple of weeks ago by Rasyid to see if I can contribute to this topic on Islam and green tech. And my confession is I'm not really much of a fan of green tech for various reasons, which I will highlight later. And let me start with a story that I encountered probably 3 years ago, as I was very privileged to guest lecture at the University of Malaya. So a student came up to me during after my classes. I think that time I was teaching environment and media. And she was tasked by her lecturer to do a video documentation on green technology. So she came up to me and asked for permission. I said, yes, I would like to contribute to your research, to which she prepared a long list of questions. And among some of the questions which were really, really memorable, and I needed to share with you, was she required me in the first question to define what green technology was. Now, she was an environmental science student. I paused and I said, I think I know my definition, but to be fair, I would like to hear your definition. She was probably about 19 or 20, to which she then highlighted to me her knowledge on what the definition was. So green technology is a technology that helps alleviate environmental issues and so on and so forth. And then we cross-checked. My definition and her definition were quite similar. So I needed to establish that both me and her understood what green technology was. And the next question she asked, which will forever be in my mind, was quite a tricky question. She said, Puan Yasmin, which is greener, an electric bike or a normal bike? And in my mind, I knew what I was going to say, but I said, well, I won't answer that question till I hear your opinion. And without hesitation, she said, obviously, the electric bike is greener. I see many nods. And I was shocked. So are you saying for hundreds of years we've been cycling and it's just not green? So I asked her, why is an electric bike greener than a normal bike? She's like, oh, because it has a battery, it allows you to store energy, and so on and so forth. And I'm thinking, my goodness, is this our level of understanding of green tech? And that would be the opening of what I'm going to share with you. So when Rasyid mentioned that I was invited to speak here, I said, Rasyid, it's a very subjective issue. Why don't you decide what topic I would choose? So I don't mean to put you in the spot here, Rasyid. So I decided that I would talk about green education to foster a green lifestyle. And I'm going to start by giving you 3 scenarios of what this topic really means. So I'm going to start by asking you to think about what green education is. Is it a lot different from basic education we have? If it's a lot different, in what perspective and what ways is it different from the kind of education we receive, whether in our formal institution or whether homeschool and so on and so forth? My understanding of green education is just not about what we learn in a formal setting. Not just what you learn from books, or not just what you're expected to memorize from books. For me, green education has a lot more to do with experiential learning as well. And what I mean by experiential learning is going out there to learn about elements about environment or nature, which I have 2 daughters in school, one in high school and one in primary school. I can count the number of times they actually have these kind of outdoor learning experiences. And let me qualify that green education is not just the responsibility of educators. The biggest responsibility of imparting green education, in my perspective, would be people like you and me, parents. And I think that's one important component of education that we don't really talk about. We expect some third party to consistently educate our children and give them the full responsibility and have these high expectations of these third party without looking at ourselves as also potential educators in this area. So identifying what green education constitutes is very complex in my perspective. There are probably many definitions. But as I was looking through the goodie bag that I received earlier, and thank you IAIS for books, but books are always the best gifts. And I turned to the book that you all have, I think second page. Can't remember what his name was. And in that second page, I read, and it caught my attention immediately, in which the writer quoted, "No sacred scripture has spoken about nature and earth as much as the Quran. The Quran contains guidelines about our treatment of earth. In short, environmental ethics is embedded in our Islamic learning." So when I look at green education, I look at it as something essential in all of us. If we understand our scriptures correctly, and we embrace the knowledge written in our scriptures, therefore 50% of the education a child has access to, which is mostly at home, should be our responsibility to inculcate. And that's how I see green education. My personal experience with green education started with my 3-year-old when I started Ecoknights. We were doing a lot of environmental programs with children specifically. And one of our challenges one day, so it was a activity where the entire office of IBM brought their children to the office to see what mommy and daddy does at work. But mommy and daddy doesn't want the children to be in the office for too long, so hired us to take them out to enjoy nature. And we decided that we're going to conduct a river education program for these kids. These kids were between 4, 5, 6, maybe some in primary school. And the minute we approached the river, none of the kids wanted to get down from the bus. First of all, the bus had cartoons playing, so that was not fair. They were all stuck to the cartoon. And as we got down, 90% of the kids says, the river is dirty, we're not going in, there's going to be snakes, there's going to be that. Maximally fearful of being out. And in retrospect, the river was a class 2 river, so it was clear. You can see right to the riverbed. It was flowing through a palm oil plantation, and it had very high tannin content. So it was very clear water, but it was like teh-o color because of the tannin content in there. So the kids identify that as a polluted river, not knowing that it's actually a very clean river, but just had some chemicals, natural chemicals from the soil in it. Number 2, when they saw the algae floating by the side and brown leaves, they immediately disliked it, saying that it's dirty. Okay, number 2. So I was thinking, I have 3 hours with them, and if they refuse to get in the river, what are we going to do? Either go back to the bus and watch more cartoons, or just drive around the area and go back home. And I think that was the turning point when I realized that a lot of our children today are very nature deficit. So when you're nature deficit, and this is a syndrome that has been declared in the US as a catastrophe because most American children are very nature deprived. And when you're nature deprived, obviously your perspective of nature is very skewed to only what educational materials you have access to. For example, when I first brought my daughter to Lanchang to have a look at elephants for the first time in her life, she got the shock of her life. She said, "Why are they not pink?" And then I realized the only exposure she had to elephants on TV and books they were all pink, and they were a lot smaller. So when she saw a massive elephant, she couldn't fathom or imagine that this was what she learned at home. And that was a turning point for me and say that I think there's only some limitation to books and cartoons. The real kind of green education is when you actually engage with your children and bring them out and enjoy nature. So back to the story of the river. I was very lucky. My daughter and Bryn, they were the same age, came along. Now Bryn, at that time was 3, and my daughter was 3 too, is a different species of a little boy. His father was a Nat Geo photographer, and 6 months old, he was already traveling and in a backpack style at the back of his dad in the Saharan desert, capturing pictures of camels. And he's a boy that at 5 years old could actually scientifically name species of snakes because that's his fascination, and has single-handedly caught some as well. So when I purposely brought Bryn, he was my backup plan because I knew very well these urban kids were not going to jump in the river and enjoy, because we had butterfly catching activity, we had fish catching activity, we had all the nets and aquariums. And I'm thinking, if I'm an adult cannot convince these kids to enjoy the river, then I failed quite miserably. And to my surprise, when I brought Bryn, my secret weapon, out, assisted by my daughter, the first thing he did was took off his shoes, took out everything, took his butterfly net and fish net, and jumped straight in the river with my daughter and started, catching damselflies, dragonflies, and this boy knows how to catch damselflies and dragonflies differently, yeah? How to handle them and release them. The minute Bryn and Mia did that, in less than 5 minutes, all the kids went into the river. And in another 5 minutes, they all forgot about the girliness of the river or the danger of the river, and so on and so forth, in just a span of 5 minutes. It's a syndrome of monkey see, monkey do, if you know what I mean. And the fact that a child can lead and eradicate this fear and eradicate this presumptive notion of what nature is quite incredible. And then how does this relate to green technology? And as the first example I quoted just now earlier about the story with the student who understands green technology as the most important technology that will save the environment, but is not able to distinguish between which is greener, is my really serious concern. I think maybe it's post-modern society's kind of belief or thinking. But my concern now is, what is our current generation thinking in terms of the application and the adoption of green technology today? Last year in November, we had a nuclear conference in Kuala Lumpur. And to my surprise, a lot of university students came and debated that nuclear technology is green. Of course, there are many sides to this story. But when we had to probe to ask them what aspect of green technology was green, they could only reply or rebut in terms of carbon emission. But the entire aspect of mining for uranium to feed nuclear plants and so on was just not part of the equation. So my concern with green education today is, I think it's a little bit industry-led. It's very industry-led. There's a lot of money involved in green technology. Number 2, I'm quite afraid that green technology could be a political fad. That as our governance structure change or governance change, that it may or may not be something that the country takes seriously. So this is something that I would like you to think about in terms of not green technology as a current fad, but green technology as essentially a potential solution to address the environmental issues that we're facing. So now I think I'm down now to 1 minute. So it's actually not about technology. Technological solutions have existed for a long time, from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Technological solutions are predominantly man-made and man-operated, which has actually clouded our perception of what green technology is, and to a large extent that girl that came up to me to interview me. So my question is, what are we actually putting in the books in terms of green education today? And who actually monitors and measures these impacts of the kind of information that we're actually sending out to our younger generation? Eventually, it's not about the technology. At least that's my perspective. It's about the ethical and responsible application of that technology to help alleviate the Earth of its problems. So eventually, the person handling green technology is a person too, a man or a woman. My concern is that person knowledgeable enough to know when is the right ethical moment to deploy green technology for the betterment of the country. And with this, I hope I've touched on the subject matter, green education to foster a green lifestyle. But I'm going to leave you with this. Is a green lifestyle a lifestyle where you can afford all sorts of green gadgets? Because if that's the case, you're greener because you drive a hybrid car, and I'm less green because I don't drive a hybrid car, then that's a misnomer. So I challenge you to actually look at really cost-effective, non-technological solutions towards a greener lifestyle. Not everything is technologically driven. Is a person who consumes responsibility, who could not afford green technology, but every time it rains collects rainwater to water his garden, and does not throw away food because he values the potential of food converted into compost. Is that person less green because he or she is unable to afford green gadgets? When I was asked to speak at a forum for Koperasi Penjaja-Penjaja Wilayah Persekutuan, these are hawkers, they asked me, Puan Yasmin, can you tell us how we, as food sellers, reduce our impact on the environment? 100% of them were Muslims. And my only answer is, whatever that I am teaching you right now, or saying, or putting up in slides, again, is already in our sacred scripture. If I were you, I would go back and embrace that sacred scripture again, and this time read it with the intention of understanding what the scripture is going to say, to be able to be more responsible about how you deal with your food waste, about how you deal with your business. Lastly, I think, again, referring to postmodern society, like you and me, maturity has a lot to do with green lifestyle. As a judge in the MPPJ scheme, the rebate for tax exemption for green homes, I've been to 100 over homes in MPPJ, and my observation is all the same. Most of the people that are becoming green are senior citizens. And most of them tell me, Puan, when I was younger, I made a lot more money. The top 5 important things in my life has never been about caring for my environment, planting the food I eat, making sure I'm healthy, and so on and so forth. When I was younger, my top 5 priorities in life were different. Only when I retire, only when I have time to read more, only when I have time to contribute back to society, I realized that I should have started younger. So falling on these kind of testimonials from the senior citizens that I met, I really hope that our education starts seriously, not just from university, but from the kindergarten. And number 2, start at homes. If all women in this country, mothers like you and me, which are very influential, you can always let the husband be the main man, but the queen is always more powerful than the king. You have the authority and power to mold these minds. And I think green education does not just start in school. Green education starts the minute you bring life into this world. So with this, I wish all of you a good time and good luck in thinking about what part of your scripture you can embody at home and what part of education you can play a significant role in your family. The next generation of Malaysians who do not care about the environment is simply our fault. Thank you very much.